Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for the Collective's first event in 2021. My name is Daniel Barkin. Sorry, I just hit the microphone. And I sit on Federation's Emerging Philanthropists Campaign Cabinet. Emerging Philanthropists, or EP for short, is Federation's philanthropy space for those of us 40 and under who are tremendously proud of the work of the Federation. After a year of many unknowns and rescheduling, we are excited to finally launch, quote, launch the Collective, EP's newest community for emerging philanthropists, giving $2,500 or more to Federation's annual campaign. Our goal here is to bring, we want to bring emerging philanthropists around a dinner table, for tonight virtually, but soon in person, to connect, learn, and inspire in an exclusive and hopefully delectable setting. There's no denying the power of conversation around the dinner table, and tonight we hope to give you a taste of what being part of the Collective means and hopefully inspire you to take the leap to becoming part of something a little bit more powerful. Especially now, while tonight's conversation is about food, identity, and resiliency, we would be remiss if we did not mention how difficult this week has been for our Jewish community, both abroad and at home. On a personal level, while I continue to pray for peace and healing, I am proud to say that the Jewish Federation's Community Security Initiative continues to work around the clock to keep our Jewish institutions, our synagogues, our schools safe here in Los Angeles. Our partnerships in Israel with organizations such as the Israel Trauma Coalition has been working tirelessly to provide resources, training, and counseling to the most vulnerable members of the community in Israel who are being impacted by the current conflict. I encourage all of you to join us if you're interested in becoming a part of the Collective, to reach out to Alyssa Brule. She's going to post her contact information in the chat for you. I really want to thank everyone on our EP co-chairs, Bryan and Tamara Cagle, and my event co-chair, Shirley Pakdaman, for all the collaboration and hard work that they have put into planning this event. All of us we're always available to chat about EP or the Collective. Please reach out to Alyssa, reach out to us individually. We'd love to share more about why we're so passionate about some of the work that the Jewish Federation does and why we support that work. So with that, I will turn it over to Shirley, who will give a quick Federation update.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Hi, everyone. I'm Shirley Pakdaman, and I'm on the Federation's Emerging Philanthropists Campaign Cabinet, and also I'm an Emerging Sylvia Weiss Women's Philanthropy Co-Chair. So needless to say, I'm very personally invested and very proud of supporting Federation's mission to help the communities most vulnerable. As tonight's program is about food, I want to share one piece of Federation's impactful work, which I find to be inspiring and a great example of how Federation identifies our community's greatest challenges and find ways to create solutions. As the pandemic hit, our Federation connected with partners and young adults in our community to do wellness checks. And what we learned was that a surprisingly large number of Jewish college students and 20 to 30-year-olds were struggling to afford food and suffering nutritionally. The Federation responded by helping to launch Well Fed, a program that provides $250 grocery gift cards and meal delivery cards to food insecure college students and also young adults who lost jobs and whose families were experiencing unemployment or reductions in income. In 2020, Well Fed helped over 400 young adults. And because we knew that support for this need was still present, in March of 2021, we initiated a second round of Well Fed. Within days of launching, 850 new young adults submitted applications. A quarter of the applicants also asked for additional social services, which we're now providing. And while our world is opening up and life is returning to some form of normalcy, there are still so many people impacted by this pandemic. And for those of you who already made a gift to the Federation, we thank you so much. There's still a lot of work to be done. So if you have yet to make your gift this year, or if you feel inspired to give just a little bit more, please do so at yajewishla.org/give, or Alyssa's going to put a link in the chat box. There you go. And just a couple of notes before we dive in. We'll leave some time at the end for questions from the audience for Chef Twitty. So feel free to please use the chat feature to send in your question ahead of time. And if you can please put yourself on mute throughout the program, that would be really great. Now I'd like to introduce to you our EP Campaign Cabinet co-chair and tonight's moderator and foodie extraordinaire, Bryan Wasser, who will kick off tonight's event. Bryan's love of food extends way back to his childhood when he was home sick for a week in 5th grade. And instead of watching cartoons, he watched the great chefs of the world on TV, like Julia Child and stuff like that, cooking. Then he started cooking himself, cooking spaghetti pomodoro for his family Shabbat meals so that he would have a big bowl of pasta before his weekend tennis tournaments. And as Bryan grew up, his love of food grew up too, and it became a love of travel and cultures, and he was greatly influenced by our current great chefs of the world to seek out traditional ethnic cuisines in Los Angeles and beyond. Welcome, Bryan.
Thank you so much, Shirley. Yeah, gives me some interesting memories about watching the Discovery Channel and watching dubbed chefs cooking of ingredients that I didn't know back then. But you know, I'm pleased and honored to use that knowledge to be able to introduce our guest today, James Beard award-winning author and culinary historian, Chef Michael Twitty. So thank you so much, Michael, for joining us today. You know, I know a lot of us have a lot of our minds, you know, currently concerning the situation at home and abroad, and perhaps, as I often do, find solace in something familiar, something comforting, something delicious. You know, food has always been an important part of the story of the Jewish people and of humans generally, and can capture emotions, excitement, can be used in celebration, certainly can be built from and around memories. You know, while most of us will not probably want to remember the pandemic or, you know, the bad times, you know, certainly we saw a lot of people turning to food and reaching into our collective memories of simpler, happier times. So why do you, you know, think that food has such a transformative power to connect people, and why, as you so eloquently put in your cookbook, in your book, The Cooking Gene, which is the 2018 winner of both the James Beard award for writing and cookbook of the year. If you haven't gotten it, it's amazing. I'm currently halfway through it. It's fantastic. Why do you think memories are the most indispensable ingredient?
So I say that because I think in both the cooking of the Black and Jewish diasporas, which are nothing new, I should say. That's the most important part. This is a millennia old engagement. Food is a mnemonic device. Food is how we remember where we've been, who we are, and it's a hint about where we're going. And it's interesting that, you know, I guess I have, every time you say something that's like could be perceived as a platitude or a cliche about something, especially food related, somebody always chimes in and says, well, that's everybody. No, it's not. No, it's not. Food does not have the same meaning and import for every culture, even though everybody eats and everybody has to eat. It's not the same. It's not the same. Having grown up in an area where different people from the Chinese diaspora and the Greek diaspora and folks who are French have been, especially when I've, you know, gone to Canada or gone to Louisiana and other places, it's not the same. These are all cultures that revere food, right? And of course, Italian culture and Italian American culture revere food. I've been to Italy. And it's just not the same. It's not food. Food has a different love language per culture. Sometimes those connections are really apparent, and sometimes they're really not. And that's just what it is. So when I say mnemonic device, what am I talking about? Well, obviously in Jewish practice, which is different from Jewish peoplehood, the Seder comes to mind, right? And I guess that if people want to, they can go to my Instagram and see on the Cooking Gene how I've done an African-American Seder plate, which continues to grow and evolve over time. But the idea is that food gives us the sense of, this is a place marker and here's a story behind it. So for example, for some people, karpas is not parsley. For some people, it's celery. For some people, it is potato. And so every time a family has a tradition of using potato as karpas, that brings the story, well, why, Mazé, why is this so? It's because if you were from, the shtetl, you didn't have there was no such thing as parsley. You didn't go to the market and get no parsley. In the springtime was like, it was still like, you're still living in like partial permafrost. The only thing that you had were new potatoes. And we think that, we oftentimes we think about the people of the past, we think they were stumbling through life. No, they came up with more ingenious solutions every day to survive than we do, that we know about, because they had to. And so there were ways of, making sure that you had a fresh crop of new potatoes in the spring, using straw and hay and, things. And there were ways of storing food so that you had things to go from year to year. It wasn't just somebody grew it somewhere else and was carted in. That's not how it worked. You had to be able to grow food for yourself. And we don't often think of ourselves as the Jewish people as farmers, as growers. And we were very much an agrarian and pastoral people for quite some time in Eretz HaKodesh, but also in the diaspora. Even though we could not own land, we were still people of the land, which has a negative connotation. So in the African-American side, I think one of the greatest moments of 2020 for me, that's funny to say, was going to Sierra Leone, which is the homeland of more than one direct line of my lineage. And I was in this village in central Sierra Leone, and it was a Muslim village. And I remember telling the chief, who was so enthusiastic about having us there, they were showing us how they plowed with this big ox and the whole thing. And I jumped in there, to their complete surprise, in my good clothes, jumped in there and started helping them plow. And they were like, what? This American from probably lives in some big city knows how to do this. And I remember the response when I told the chief. I said, sir, my father grew up farming. My grandfather was a farmer. My grandfather, ladies and gentlemen, was one of the founders of the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. The civil rights organization helped Black farmers get back on the land and keep their land. And that this was something that was taught to me. And he said, God is great. He thought that maintaining that tradition and being close to the earth was sacred. And so for me, that's all these things that we come with our food, our trauma, the fact that Jewish joy and Black joy is expressed through food, the fact that food is, I joke about this, but it's not really a joke, but it's a joke. Like, we're the only people who, we have to give somebody something horrible to eat. And I'm like, do we have to eat our oppression? Do we have to do that? Is that a thing? But it's very much. I've never known anybody outside of these two worlds that I'm a part of. My mother used to go, this is completely nasty. You have to have some. And I'm like, why? Why do we have to eat nasty things? No, slavery is over. I'm not eating no nasty things. No, thank you. And then, of course, in every Jewish setting, you have to try this. This is terrible. Like, why do I have to eat it if it's terrible? Again, we eat our oppression. We do this. And that's half a joke, but someone said to me recently that there is a value in having a sensory imbibement of things that are unpleasant, especially if surviving unpleasant things is your modus operandi as a people. You got to be able to deal with that. So that's why I say it's a memory device.
Fascinating. So I guess I'm going to ask a silly question, which is, gefilte fish is, yes or no? And then I'll jump into the real question.
Gefilte fish is one of those things that I guess some clubs you can join, others you got to be born in. Doesn't matter if you're Jewish or not. I mean, remember, I don't know if you all had this. I was a Hebrew school teacher for 15 years. So if anybody has any Nobel Peace Prize connections, you might want to, and I taught 6th and 7th grade, predominantly, not always, but predominantly. So every gray hair in my head is earned, I assure you. But there was a film we used to kind of like get occasionally and show. It was called Gefilte Fish, and it was like, so the grandma's like, here's my chopper that great grandma so and so brought from the old country, and that's how I make my gefilte fish. And the next one is the mom, and she's like, I've upgraded to like a food processor, so this is how I make my gefilte fish. And then there's the daughter, and she goes, this is a jar of gefilte fish. There, I made gefilte fish. So that's instructive. But so, you know, I'm glad that I'm friends with Jeffrey Yaskowitz and Liz Alpern of Gefilteria in New York. And they've taught me a lot. First of all, they've taught me that the food wasn't this bland gray nonsense. That's tenement food. That's post-tenement food. That's the food of the suburbs. That is not the food of Eastern Europe and Russia. It's not, you know, because that food had color, right? You had all these beautiful things. And gefilte fish, even though the idea is horrific, because it's Frankenfish, basically. You know, it's literally, you take a fish, you take it, you put it in your bathtub, which is like where you're taking baths now that the fish is in the bathtub. Are you sharing the water with the fish? I don't know. These are questions that I am not allowed to ask. And then, like, you do the fish in, unfortunately, you know, checked. And for those of us who are not fish eaters or vegetarians or vegans, I do apologize, but that's basically what happens. And then you turn this thing into a delicacy. I shouldn't do that. No rabbit ears. A delicacy. Hold their hands together. When you're Black and Jewish, it's very difficult to keep your hands from expressing your thoughts. And you would take that and make it with the crumbs of the week, like literally saving the crumbs. I mean, there's this, you know, all these tired jokes about our thriftiness as a people belie the fact that everybody else lauds people for being like non-food wasters. Let's flip that script a little bit. You know, no, we're not cheap. We're not wasting food. We use the whole animal. The same thing when people talk nonsense about Black folks in food. I say, so all the things that you credit the most innovative chefs today, our people were doing for centuries, and we never got a single bit of credit for it. So nonsense. And so in that same sense, we were not wasting food. We were not, you know, Baal Tashchit does not just apply to trees. It applies to our food. Don't waste, don't destroy. Our ethics and our values are in the food. And also the idea that the gefilte fish communicated this passionate faith on the part of Jewish women who were cooks. So we forget about that. We forget about the fact that the Jewish woman was not just the keeper of her home's kashrut, but as a community had their own sort of spirituality around food and ideas about food. So for example, there were all these books of techinot. The proper term is techinas. And techinas were these prayer books that Jewish women would have commissioned or they write themselves. And half of those prayers, apart from the prayers for themselves, their husband, the mikveh, this, that, and other, were for food. And there are prayers for gefilte fish, and there are prayers for cholent, and there are prayers for taking challah, and there are all these different things, and it doesn't stop at the dish. It's like, may this dish da 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 da. They're spell books, as I've often said. A good recipe is not a dictation; it's a spell. You know, if you don't know what spell you're cooking for, what spell you're using, you can turn somebody into a frog easily. Quick tangent, because I'm Black and gay and Jewish, so tangents are my thing. This one, I put out one time a recipe for Valentine's Day for a cream cheese, sour cream, all butter pound cake with salted caramel drizzle. That's a lot. I know you can only have it once a year, like Gribbinus, only once a year, or else you don't love yourself. But anyways, so this one lady, she makes the thing, and she's like, "Oh, this is awful. This is plastic." I'm like, "What do you want? Do you want your grocery money back? I mean, come on." And I was like, "Why did you make the cake?" She said, "Well, I made it for a Super Bowl party." I said, "First of all, honey, I've never been to a Super Bowl party. My people don't do that. Second of all, let's get this straight. This recipe was not for a group of people. It was for your beloved. And it was for a purpose." So a week later, I get an email, a redemptive email from another woman who says, "Mr. Twitty, I've been married to my husband for 25 years. I made him this lovely decadent cake for Valentine's Day, and guess what? It worked." So she knew what spell I was trying to cast. I wasn't trying to We have no little napkin in Super Bowl football, little things on a napkin. No, that wasn't my goal. My goal was, look what I did for you. Do something for me. That was my goal. So yeah, food is also very sexual. Thank you very much, and very relationship engendering. I'm not ashamed of that. That's a very big part of Black and Jewish food lore. But gefilte fish is these women trying to bring hope. I know that's weird. Gefilte fish and hope. Like, I know for some people, they see gefilte fish, they lose all hope, especially when it comes from the jar. But it's about the Messianic era. You know, it's the belief that if you ever wonder why in certain Jewish homes, I'm not trying to be all Ashkenormative here, but for a second, let's go with this. But in certain Jewish homes, you know, gefilte fish, the brisket and the chicken always make an appearance. There is a reason for that. Those are all of the Messianic monsters that are shechted at the end of time to show that the Mashiach has come. So the Z's, the big chicken, becomes the roast chicken on your plate, or the boiled chicken if you're yeah, you know, I ain't gonna say anything. Bless your heart. The brisket is for the behemoths, the big quadruped. That's the best way to put it. And the gefilte fish represents the Leviathan. So the same big fish that swallows Job is the same big fish that is the Messianic monster that it is at the end of time. We sit in its sukkah made out of its beautiful iridescent scales, while David Hamelech and Miriam the prophetess and Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher, perform in a band for us. Listen, don't hate the messenger. If y'all like, that's complete nonsense. Don't hate me, but it's actually very important for me as a culinary historian anthropologist to kind of look at that and go, that's a really deep meaning. That whether you buy into the eschatological or theological origins of it, is totally immaterial, because what it means is that those cooks, those chefs, those people, those women, and beyond imbued their food with a kind of sense of meaning and purpose that, you know, our In-N-Out burgers don't have.
And little to, you know, to the surprise of most of the people on this Zoom call, you've sort of answered a lot of some of the questions that I had that you didn't even know I was asking, which is, you know, you talk about it in your book, you know, that in the Old South is a place where people used to use food to tell themselves who they are, right? And when I thought about that, I thought about Jews, and that we do the same and have for millennia in our traditions and practices, and whether, you know, you found it to be true that it does apply to Jews, and if there were certain dishes in your mind that sort of exhibited that storytelling. I think you hit on some of those absolutely right here, that through what we see on the plate, there is a story to be told. There are origins, there are history to everything, little known to most people. And, you know, certainly during this pandemic, we've seen a lot of the restaurants around us sort of pivot, you know, to a certain degree, and capture comfort foods and things of that nature. And, you know, little do people know, and certainly you can educate most of us on it, is that the root of American cuisine is really rooted in the African diaspora. So could you educate us a little bit about that in terms of some facts that may surprise us about what we're consuming every day? Like when I go and grab that fried chicken sandwich or something else that's on my plate that I don't know why it's there, can you sort of give people a little glimpse into that?
Yeah, it's like this. It's become easier for me to explain as time has gone on, because the first thing you have to do is like talk to it from a place of insularity. And even for us as Black Americans, African Americans, we really did not ever get the memo that we were worth anything, even as we made billions of dollars for this country and built it for free. You know, just facts. But, you know, I came to this through years of teaching and also studying Jewish foodways. And so it kind of hit me that I could venture into these waters after learning about the fact that, you know, fish and chips in England is actually Jewish in origin. And Linsertort in Central Europe and Germany was invented by a Jewish baker. And so there were all these like hidden elements. For example, the tomato is brought to Italy by means of Jews from Spain and Portugal who are escaping the Inquisition, but who are also, remember, the first people to go west to the Americas on those ships other than the explorers were enslaved Africans, Black folks of dubious legal status, Jews, and Moriscos, which was the Muslim version of people who were forcibly converted to Christianity by the Spanish and Portuguese. And these things are so, side note, I'm big into genetic genealogy, and it's hilarious for me to see so many Latin folks go, why am I part Middle Eastern? Because that's your people, your ancestors, Jews and Muslims, were forced out of Spain and Portugal and went to the New World, and there's still communities that have deep ties to Judaism in the southwest of the place. These things don't die. These things are part of it. And, less so, why are we part African? Well, guess what? So let me give you the best al-regel achad. Remember Hillel said that you have to make a convert on one foot, on one leg? So let me give you the best version I can give you. So when people say, well, what's African? And they get that, they say the same exact tone with me and the same face. And I'm just like, oh, Lord have mercy. I got work to do. It's interesting because the African Atlantic is very complex. It's not a one-way trip. It is about a back and forth between both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. So the first stat that I should give you is this. Before 1820, which was the time of the large German and Irish migration to the Americas, because of revolutions, but also because of famine and poverty, the largest group to cross the ocean were enslaved Africans. Brazil receives millions. And if you're wondering why Brazil isn't all Black, or some places, or because most enslaved Africans were brought to the sugarcane raising parts of the Americas would die in 7 years. They were worked to death. And because it was cheaper to bring them over on the ships from Africa and swifter. So for my ancestors who came to North America, it was a 3 to 4 to 6 month trip, if you can even imagine that, with at least 20% human loss per ship, whether it was tight pack or loose pack. Tight pack meant we're going to cram as many people in here and hope for the best. Loose pack was we're going to have a smaller ship with less people in the hopes that we have less death. I've been to those castles in Ghana and other places. All I can say is that it is the closest I will feel to this. You know that the song from Israel, Lo ahavti dai, I have not loved enough. That's what I felt when I was in that men's dungeon. It was almost pitch black. I sat on the floor so I could, get some semblance of what they felt like. And then I remembered I can't move. I wouldn't be able to move. I'd be crammed in with a lot of other people. So with those human beings came food that was brought to grow in the Americas. And by that time that the predominant number of my ancestors had arrived in colonial North America, there was a significant transfer of foods from the Americas to Africa. And also Africa had absorbed foods from Southeast Asia, South Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, Eurasia. But Africa had 2,000 indigenous food plants, including domestic plants. So the image of Africa the starving is a very post-colonial endeavor because the Belgians and the Germans, the English, certainly the Portuguese, the Spanish, and the French took Africans off their land and made them go work rubber plantations, etc. And so there was no longer a continuous connection with the soil. And so crops started to die. People started to die of starvation, had to depend on the colonial powers. So before all that happens, Africa's the garden of the world because there's so many, it's a tropical climate, but there's also microclimates. So there's plants from every single continent except for Australia, being grown in Africa. And some of those crops like yams and African rice are indigenous. Black-eyed peas are indigenous. muskmelon, watermelon is indigenous, and so on. We can go on further. And then cassava, sweet potato, peanuts, tomatoes, etc., come into the African, sub-Saharan African world, foods that were not commonly grown in Europe. And when they go back across the ocean, they double, there's the indigenous heritage, of course, where these things come from. But remember, just like Blacks and Jews in the Western world were often in the same place at the same time, Africans and indigenous people were often in the same place at the same time, resisting enslavement and colonialism together. So it wasn't just that the indigenous people just said, here's a gift. In American school, we teach our kids, well, the Native Americans contributed. That's not how it worked. That's not how it happened. But what did happen was people of different backgrounds sojourned together, had children together. That's a nice way of putting it. Traded with each other, fought with each other. And every single time these complex interactions happened, food was exchanged. Now, last part, in the American South, which was connected to other parts of the African Atlantic and African diaspora, the Caribbean, Brazil, Haiti, Mexico, etc., you had this flow of people and ideas. And much like the Caribbean and Brazil, the Europeans who came there, they didn't have a choice. The climate was different, which meant you couldn't raise the same types of grains that you made bread from. The culture was different. The natural resources and pace was different. And for anybody who was living adjacent to and within the realm of enslaved Africans and free people of color, you lived how they lived. So for example, guys, I am often found at Colonial Williamsburg. I would do a lot of consulting for them. And we're building an African Virginian enslaved person's garden in the colonial nursery where everybody comes to use the pretty colonial plants and learns about the different origins of the people. We have an indigenous garden and we have an enslaved African garden going up. And for a lot of people who come through there, a lot of them whom are American Southerners, they just have no clue that peanuts, tomatoes, barbecue, deep frying, from beignets to kala, which is a rice fritter in Louisiana, to fried chicken, to the different kinds of melons that we grew because they were a source of hydration and vitamins. Okra, of course. And a lot of these things connect with Jewish food. My home synagogue is Sephardic Mizrahi. So bamia, lubia, rubia, the hot peppers, all those foods are a connection. Now, what's cool is that when I'm still writing Kosher Soul, but connecting with the Sephardic communities that came from Turkey and Rhodes that came to the South, it's interesting that these were the communities that did not do the fusion cooking. And there's an interesting reason why. For the Ashkenazi Jews that came to the Deep South, the fact that Black women who were in their employ were doing this cooking, and others around them created this kind of fusion between African American, Deep Southern, and Ashkenazi immigrant Jewish food, was very exciting, very different, and also helped them assimilate partially into the culture. For Sephardic Jews that came to these same places, though, caveat, the food, they also had mamaliga, polenta, forms of that. They also had hot peppers. They also had okra. They also had black-eyed peas. So they were not really interested. And it's like when somebody's cuisine is very similar to yours, and it's like, So a lot of those families, what they would do is when they ate Southern, and when they ate Sephardic, they ate Sephardic. Whereas for the Ashkenazi Jews, when they ate Jewish, they ate Black. And I remember two people in particular. One came from, they're both from Savannah. I met one lady in Maine and one gentleman in Savannah. And it was fascinating to me because both of them said the same exact thing. And they were just kind of like testifying to me. I didn't ask them, which is very Southern, very Southern. And they said, we started talking about, food. And they was like, well, for Shabbat dinner, the guy had a very deep, like coastal Georgia accent. He looked like a lawyer from New York, but so help me, he was a Bubba. He was a Jewish Bubba. And I said to him, I said, what was Shabbat dinner like? He said, Shabbat dinner was fried chicken, okra soup, and red rice and grits, and we had biscuits sometimes to the holler. If you think that's confusing, remember when it confused me when I went to Minnesota and the rabbi at the former kosher mart, which is now closed up there, said to me, "Oh, you're from Maryland." And I said, "I've never heard a Jew talk like this before in my life." He's like, "What you doing all the way up here in Minnesota?" And I was like, "Oh my God, a rabbi should not talk this way. What's going on?" But yeah, that's what it is. It's about this tangling. The lady from Maine, by the way, said the exact same menu. And I asked her, did she know this gentleman? She said no. But that's how every Jewish family ate. Every Jewish family ate Gullah Geechee food. It was not a thing. The only difference was sometimes it was kosher-ish, sometimes it was kosher. Jewish families in the South were not strictly kosher folks, and but they were much more dedicated to Jewish communal life. But the bottom line is that all people of all backgrounds ingest this food. And to give you some perspective to tie it all up, if you go to Brazil, the national dish of Brazil is feijoada, which is beans and rice, collard greens, barbecue and hot sauce. Okay. Jamaica, rice and peas, jerk chicken. You get me? There's a theme here. Go to Mexico, tamales. Tamales are not just indigenous. Tamales are, depending upon what you put on the tamale, is also enslaved Africans when they have the banana leaf and they have the corn leaf and wrapping foods and steaming them, but also Mexican rice is the same thing as jollof rice in Nigeria, the same thing as red rice in South Carolina, it's the same thing as arroz brasiliano. It's the same thing in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, and in Rio de Janeiro and Bahia. It doesn't matter where the boat dropped us off, it's where it picked us up that matters.
Interesting. So food certainly tells those stories and it picks up the trauma, as you said, and you even said in your book that it's sort of like the art of kintsugi. And for those people that don't understand that, it's a Japanese art of making something broken and making it more beautiful by adding a gold seam or something, some additional element that the broken piece is more beautiful than the original piece. And certainly that hits on the topic of resiliency, which is certainly, what we've been trying to get to here, which is we're coming out of the pandemic, as Shirley said at the beginning of this, we're seeing changes in people, maybe not the changes that we wanted to see at the beginning, in terms of how we view each other and view the world, et cetera. And people often say, experts, they say that controlling one's own narrative is probably the best way to get towards resiliency during these uncertain times. So, in your mind, how does one cultivate resiliency, and how can food help someone in that journey? And, can we become resilient as a community, especially with what's going on now, by using food to create a Jewish people across all different types of Jews, both domestically and in the diaspora?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I like to do, that I do because it's an act of resistance to the idea that we're a monolithic people. We have to begin the serious work that should have started a long time ago of talking about identity. And I think that for a lot of people, that's a very partisan discussion in our community. And I feel it doesn't have to be. I know that it's a very partisan conversation in the Black community. I had to shut an Uber driver down the other day ago because he started screaming about like how the term African American was like the beginning of our woes, and I just said, please shut up. I didn't say that way, but basically it goes like this. There's a saying in West Africa that's very potent, and it goes, "It doesn't matter what you call me, but what I answer to." So, in other words, owning your narrative, right? My narrative does not begin with what you call me. It begins with what I answer to, what I absorb. And I told him, I said, it doesn't really matter to me if another person of color of African descent calls himself Caribbean American, African American, African American, Black American, African American, Negro, colored. It doesn't matter. That is symbolic. That is not systemic. That's not going to solve a damn problem. I don't really care if you call yourself an American Jew or a Jewish American. That has nothing to do with feeding those 1,200 some young people that y'all have helped out. It's got nothing. It's not going to feed them or not feed them. It's like I call it the hamster wheel. You're just running around the hamster wheel. Well, I think if y'all called yourselves, shut up. That's as stupid as if you or me decided to change our name or our pronouns and somebody wants to argue about that. It's not going to solve anything. But what can we agree on? We can agree that people need to eat, right? That access to healthy, nutritious food and being able to survive is a human right. That's systemic. We can agree on that, right? So we have these. So that's where culinary justice and food justice intersect, right? That we need to have a common ethic when it comes to food and hospitality. And so for me, I think one of the things that really inspired me is I have a number of chef friends who just started to like pull resources and feed people. You know, the most famous one being Jose Andres. We can't all be a Jose Andres. But my friend Chef Kurt Evans in Philadelphia, they did a thing. And I know a lot of my Jewish chef friends did a thing where they were, you know, making sure people got to eat and got to eat well. It's not just that we're going to give you some cans of food. We're going to make something delightful out of whatever we have and we're all going to feel entitled to a meal that we can eat socially distanced and enjoy that will make us all know our worth and our value. So that's one thing. I think one of the most important parts about being, existing, surviving, thriving is like when we take the time like this to do the hard work. So everybody wants to know from me, how do you like get family recipes and how do you get recipes in the community that may be lost? Well, you know, the pandemic season that we're still kind of living in is an excellent time to do that because we forget how much we need those survival ways until we really need them. I've told people before, like for Black chefs, like, yeah, we're a lot of us are subject to systemic racism, not being able to have that brick and mortar restaurant, you know, not having that capital, not having those things that other people have to build up, you know, ethnic restaurants and institutions. When the pandemic showed up, we were good because we didn't lose our brick and mortar. We didn't have one to start with. And we partially invented takeout in America because of Jim Crow. We didn't have, you know, our food came from the back door. You know, it wasn't something we could just walk up to a place and sit down like everybody else. And we were still the barbecue man on the corner in the city and in the South. And we were still the folks who bartered and brought stuff to neighbors. And we were still the people who had little stands and things because we didn't have access. And then guess what? Our folks have been flourishing because of social distance and because of, you know, having to have all the food be takeaway and all the other stuff. So and one of my best friends, Chef BJ Dennis, who was in who's in High on the Hog. We're both on Netflix together, and we're also on Padma Lakshmi's Taste the Nation. He had a dinner where they barbecued a goat. It was fantastic, and they were at a Black-owned farm, and they had picnic tables, about 20 picnic tables across a huge field. So it was perfectly socially distanced. Everybody came up at one table at a time, got their goat and their okra soup and their rice and all the good stuff. And there you go. We had a pop-up dinner. But that's how you do it. You have to kind of think in the vein of what would my ancestors do? Mm-hmm. And you'll have the answer.
Yeah, because, you know, I recently read that 98% of American farmland was dispossessed from Black farmers, and in the last century, and is now white owned. You know, and you hit on something. You said, you know, using culinary justice to invoke and inspire social justice. What do you see as sort of the future of that now, in terms of building social justice through the medium of food?
I think we have to change the conversation. You know, I was the poster boy, pinup, and centerfold for why don't these angry Black people shut up about appropriation? And because I have a Yiddishkeit, I didn't let them take that conversation into you culinary demagogue you. I was like, you know something, my ancestors bred rabbit. You remember the little rabbit who Brer Fox told, where you don't, please don't put me in the briar patch. No, please put me in the briar patch because you can't live there, but I can. I'm good. I got my source code. So, and translation for people to kind of like throw me in this thing of, how dare you? You're interrupting the melting pot. I said the melting pot was never the model. The melting pot destroys. The salad bowl preserves. You know, I am one of these people that will say, in defiance of a lot of folks who do not agree with me, that we have to acknowledge the Hazaret and the Haroset. You see what I'm saying? The very bitter and spicy and problematic with the very sweet and good. And in our tradition, we have those things together. We're reminded that life is not one or the other. Life is both of those in concert, and you better learn to deal with it. And everybody here, I think everybody here, I don't want to speak for you guys. Michael Twitty speaks for all Jews. Is the idea that when you put, I'm not hot on romaine lettuce as the Hazaret. I really am not, but I'm going to keep that to myself. But when you put Haroset with Hazeret, maror, and eat them together, it's not unpleasant, is it? It's actually quite tasty when you put the horseradish and the haroset together on the matzah, and you go, that's not that bad. And plus, you're hungry. That's also why you think it's tasty, because you want the damn matzo ball soup and other stuff that goes with it. So what I'm trying to say is that America is an opportunity. Right now, at this moment, I am not possible anywhere else in the world. And that is not a statement in endorsement of American exceptionalism. It's a statement of fact. There's no politics behind it. It's just the fact that the possibility and opportunity are here. And that we, as members of a multicultural society, have this golden opportunity to absorb from each other food, culture, ideas, but that we should do it in a respectful and responsible way that is not exploitative, that shares the wealth, that validates and uplifts. Though people forget, that's not how it happened in the past. Like the direct opposite. And we have to sort of evolve the conversation from just appropriation versus hands off versus, okay, let's talk about how we can lift each other up. The example that I use all the time is Chris Shepard, who had restaurants in Houston, and he did the most amazing thing, which was Houston is a mixed multitude of cultures. But what he did was he would be inspired by a created dish, and he would literally put on the menu, if you really like this, try the version that inspired me. Here's the address, here's the chef, here's the community. So it wasn't just Chris Shepard, white man making good money. It was Chris Shepard sharing a platform, the privilege, and the power, and directing us to be neighbors together as a Houston community. And in a lot of places, particularly in the South, that doesn't happen. It's straight up just like, look what we did, which is the same thing that they've been saying since 1619. Look what we did, and they didn't really do it. You know who did it? My grandmother did it. Her mother did it. My daddy did it. My grandfather did it. You didn't do that. But if you want to make this into a conversation about sharing and about problematic origins and talk about it in a civil way, but also celebrate the fact that we have an opportunity to do something new as free people living in the 21st century, we're good. We're good. And I'm not gonna change the context of that because I'm not comfortable talking about it at the moment. But I've had a very similar conversation with folks of Middle Eastern background here and abroad about how the ways in which the Western world and the Jewish world intersect with the foods of, because we had Jewish communities across North Africa and the Middle East. And I'll never forget having a dinner with Claudia Roden made by Israeli, Jewish, Israeli, Arab, and Palestinian chefs. And Claudia Roden, it was the most amazing moment of my dining life because, of course, she's like, you don't know Claudia Roden, she's like one of the 4 living mavens of Jewish food, global Jewish food. She's originally from Egypt, and her family had to leave in 1948 with the expulsion of Jews from the Middle East. And what's interesting about her, though, is that she lives in London. She has a very global perspective. And to sit with her, as she explained that, you know, the stuffed foods, Bryan, like in Syria and Lebanon and Israel, etc. She says this is Jerusalem was the capital of the mastery of these stuffed foods, like the stuffed aubergine and the stuffed pepper and the rice and all the good stuff, and the onions. And she said this is a food that it doesn't matter if you're Arab, Christian, Jewish, or Druze. You make this food because you love somebody. She said, especially if you make this, I'll never forget this, especially if you make stuffed carrot. Because, you know, a carrot is a lot harder to stuff than pepper. And
I don't think I've ever seen that.
Right?
Well, maybe in the Druze village, I don't know.
In Machne Yehuda and across the way in East Jerusalem, you see these huge ass carrots and those flat cabbages that you don't see anywhere else because they're easier to stuff. And she said, this is how our cultures express love, because it takes so much talent to empty it out, do the stuff and put it and make it look perfect, that if someone does that for you, they love you. And okay, I'm not going to do that. But yeah, I'm kind of like emotional. I remember all these chefs looking at her and looking at each other. And there was this moment of just like, it wasn't just a nod. When she said that, and when they understood it and they got it, they all started to like touch each other on the shoulder and grip hands. And I was like, this is more than I bargained for.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've had that happen in the South when I had a bunch of ladies in Mississippi, and I was doing this program at this historic home, and they were making food together, and white and black ladies, and they started talking and they started laughing, and the kids were involved, and they were cleaning greens together and getting peaches ready for peach cobbler, and they were doing all these things. And then they just started saying things like, hey, what's your name? Who are your kinfolk? And of course, as it happens in Deep South, several of them shared the same last name. We know why. And one of the white ladies pulled me aside and she said, I've lived in Natchez my whole life, and this is the largest integrated gathering I've ever been to. That tripped me out, man. I didn't know there was going to be like that.
Mm-hmm.
So food can bring people together, and food must bring people together, but not to like leave aside our issues, but to understand what the possibilities of community and hospitality can be, and love. Ahava.
And to that end, in terms of, you know, coming from the spirit of love, inclusivity, you know, what is and your vision, you know, for the Jewish future? And I know that we only have 6 minutes left, so to the extent that, you know, someone has a question, I just want to get that last question in, and to the extent that someone else has a question, please feel free to, you know, put something in the chat, and then we'll go with closing remarks. But, you know, you hit on a lot of topics there that I think that we need to wrap our head around in terms of what it means going forwards. How can we use all of these lessons that we've learned here today to build a better future, and what does that future look like to you?
I think we have to revisit the question of what is Jewish. And it's an elastic identity. It has boundaries. Please don't get me wrong. But it's an elastic identity. And I think one of the things that I came across that I hope to expand this next year, they're right here. Okay, excuse me. This is my cave of making, my messy desk. So I'm going to give you a quick example, then we can move on to like one little question or whatever. So a friend of mine, an artist, made these for me and other people. Trust me, I have bigger ones because this is kind of, I was like, no, these are baby. So this is a kippah, yeah? Came to me right before Pesach. And on this kippah are one of the artist's grandmothers, and Marsha P. Johnson, who was one of the leaders of the Stonewall riots, rebellion, Zora Neale Hurston, Shirley Chisholm, James Baldwin, and others. And I'm just like, this is an example of how you don't look at this and go, this is breaking tradition. This is actually the purpose of the tradition. You know, I'm reading a book right now about Passover, the Passover Seder, and the author quotes an African-American Christian professor that goes, the enslaved appropriated, and he says, no, stop there. When we say the enslaved appropriated the ideas about freedom and justice and liberation from enslavement, no, actually the whole purpose was to give that mentality as a gift to humanity. So there's no appropriation here. This is what's supposed to happen. All who were enslaved are supposed to break their chains. All who are hungry are supposed to come and eat. That's the bottom line. Not, hey, you borrowed this. You know, it has shelf life. I think the same thing with Jewish culture. We have to understand that there are, and be open to the idea of Gen Z and millennial Jewish cultural ideas and expansions and food practices, and the fact that we have to really embrace our diversity, come to grips with our globalness, and represent Jewish food as this migrational journey thing that is so much bigger than our bubbles and boxes. We've got a lot of work to do, but we've been doing this work for 4,000 years. We can do it for another 4,000.
We'll pause there. If anyone has a question, I know that we're running late on time, but I haven't seen any in the chat box. But certainly, on that note, thank you so much, Michael, for taking the collective and myself on this learning journey. I think that it's, as with everything in our religion and our culture and our people, it takes years to unpack, and it's part of the discourse of who we are to sort of, talk and kibitz and learn more every time, even if we're talking about the exact same topic. So thank you so much for the time. And for all of you out there that haven't picked up the cooking gene, please do so, and look out for the Kosher Soul when it hits the bookshelves. I know that's Michael's next great opus. And then my last comments would just be that, building off of our existing efforts at the Federation to create an inclusive Los Angeles Jewish community, Federation's diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy strives to create an intentional and unified approach grounded in best practices in the field. Creating inclusive communities is foundational to our work across our strategic initiatives, and this DEI strategy will allow us to deepen, refine, and expand our work in this area to create a shared vocabulary, which we've learned here today. There's words mean something, and approaches to ensure that we are working toward a fair, equitable, respectful, and responsive environment within our Federation and throughout the LA Jewish community. I know that was a lot to take in very quickly, but I want to thank everyone for being here. And again, if anyone has any questions, certainly speak up now. I know that all of us, are tired of Zoom, but please feel free to ask questions. And then, anyone? No? If there are no questions, then just let everyone know that there's an opportunity. Oh, go ahead, Michael.
Yes, quick thing. I just want to leave you guys with this. One of the things we've learned the past year is that we need to take care of ourselves and take care of each other, and go the extra mile to look out for people who otherwise wouldn't get our help. And that's as simple as advice. It's as simple as a meal, all that kind of good stuff. My rabbi Chaim Kasorla taught me the most valuable lesson, which is whatever happens to us occurs for the sake of someone else, and whatever happens to others occurs for our sake. We are interdependent people and independent species. So just remember to do that self-care, do that world care, that tikkun olam. And I really, Bryan, this is one of the most streamlined, elegant conversations I've had on Zoom in quite some time. And I want to thank my new family, my new LA family, for helping put this together. And I just really appreciate all of you for being here. So toda raba.
Thank you so much for your time, and thank you everyone for coming and learning something new. And lastly, but not least, we have an upcoming BGS event on June 9th at 7:30, which will be an in-depth conversation with Ben Freeman, author and educator, in conversation with Eden Cohen, the National Youth Leadership Council member, on the realities of how anti-Semitism presents itself on social media and the tools everyone can use to fight it. Certainly that is another topic that, is certainly in everyone's mind right now. So you're all invited, and we'll receive Ben's book, Jewish Pride, Rebuilding a People. On behalf of the Emerging Philanthropists, we want to thank you all for joining us tonight. And thanks again, and have a wonderful night. And thank you to everyone on the EP cabinet for putting this event together, and to our professional staff at the Federation for helping get Michael here, and so we can all listen to his wonderful words. Thank you all, and have a good night.